We're now live, Chair.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Strategic Licensing Committee. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Members of the public will be able to view the meeting using the link on the agenda. Apologies have been received from Gary Burgett, subbed by Councillor Vince Hunt, and also apologies from David Evans. Now we move on to item 2, to the minutes of the previous meeting, which you've all had copies of. I'd like to move those.
Move we
Chair. Thank you. All those in favour?
Chair, I will abstain as I'm a substitute for this meeting, but wasn't at that meeting. So
thank you, Councillor Hunt. Moving on to question 3. Public question time. To receive any public questions or petitions from the public, notice of which have been given in accordance with Procedure Rule 14. Deadline for this meeting was 5 p.m. on Thursday, the 29th of September 2022. And we have questions, or a number of questions, from Mr. M.A. alias. So if you'd like to come forward and you read all your questions, and then I'll read all the answers. Thank you.
First of all, my question was why wasn't my fare card proposal accepted? Because 2013, there's 3 fare cards proposed, and we voted on the one that got the most votes that came forward. But in this moment time, I had over 90% of the actual drivers who actually work on the taxi ranks support my proposal, which had a petition. And the signed petition.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to bring you back into what's actually written on the sheets for the questions. Okay.
If you can answer that, please. Yeah, that's really.
Yeah, carry on to your question 2, and I'll give you the answers in a minute.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, so you want to go through all the questions, then you're going to answer all the questions again?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Also, I'd like to know why the running mile is the same on all the tariffs 3, 4, 5, 6. It should be different on 5 and 6. And what is the reason behind the council's policy previously in the last 10 years bringing age restrictions to 10 years in hackney vehicles? Why was that implemented? Why are council proposing in new policy 2025, September 2020, that all new hackney vehicles have to be less than 6 years old? What is the reason behind that? Why? Why does licensing have a policy review every 4 years? Can I add anything to that or no?
Right, that's fine. I'll come back to question 1, which what is the reason council not accepting my fare card proposal, which have majority support. The council has consulted with all hackney carriage proprietors, and the responses received were all taken into consideration. The proposed table of fares aims to draw a balance between the hackney carriage trade and the needs of the travelling public, given the rising cost of living in particular the cost of food, petrol, diesel, gas and electricity. On question 2, why is running mile the same on tariffs 3, 4, 5 and 6? Should be different on all tariffs. The answer to that basically is tariffs 5 and 6 are new tariffs, and it has been proposed to set them at the same running mile rate for tariffs 3 and 4 as a baseline to allow for members of the public to adapt to the new table of fares charging structure. On question 3, which was what's the reason behind council previously in the last 10 years bringing in age restrictions of 10 years on the hackney vehicles. Nationally, there now continues to be a significant drive to improve air quality, and it is acknowledged that motor vehicle emissions continue to be the primary cause of poor air quality, and this impacts on human health and the environment. The Council needs to continue to promote measures that improve air quality, including reducing the emissions from hackney carriages and private hire vehicles. Age restrictions are all part of this work. Your question 4, while the Council proposing in a new policy September 2025 that new hackney vehicles have to be less than 6 years old. There is no proposal for a new policy in September 2025. The reference made to September 2025 is regarding an extended transitional period from the previous 2019 to 2023 policy. The transitional period in the 2019 to 2023 policy was up to and included the 31st of March 2024, and the proposed policy allows for an additional 12 months under the same requirements as the previous policy. Question 5, why does the licensing department have policy review every 4 years? The hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy is a subject of continuous evaluation and can be formally reviewed if necessary at any time. A 4-year period is set for reviewing the policy to ensure that the policy remains relevant to the changes in legislation if no interim formal reviews have been undertaken. Those are the answers. Thank you.
May I add anything or no?
No. Sorry. Right, we move on. Disposable pecuniary interest. Have we any? Thank you, Councillor Isherwood.
Thank you, Chair. Just that's in item 8, one of the proposed variations to the licensed streets involves an area controlled by Oswestry Town Council, of which I'm a member, and I did take part in their discussion to request that. So I feel there would be a perception of bias, so I'll leave the room during that item.
Right. Thank you. Any others? Right. Move on. Report on the licensing fees and charges for 2023-24, and a report of the transactional and licensing team manager. I'll let you speak on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the report that's brought before you today to do with the fees and charges, the annual report that I bring to this committee this time of year. It looks at all licensing fees and charges for all licence types, and what we use in the calculation of those fees is all the costs incurred to process licences and deal with applications, from heating, lighting, water expenses to printing to officer time. So everything is taken into consideration because the licensing service in legislation needs to be a cost neutral service, and that's all we edge towards. The difficulty that we have in the recent years is the COVID pandemic, and the licences not being renewed and different applications coming in, and businesses trying to diversify. So bear in mind, these fees include actual income for 2021-22 and estimates for 2022-23. And this is how the fees are calculated. So just so that you're aware, the income that is reported in this is the actuals during the COVID pandemic period. That's why I'm making that point. As we go through the next 12 months, will be actual fees post the pandemic. And hopefully the position will be slightly different, but just so that you're aware, because I know in the appendices where we report on the costs and income surplus and deficits, which is Appendix K, doesn't reflect the best of pictures. purely because that's where we are in the position of calculating these fees. But I just wanted to really make that point, that it is those actuals for the secondary year of the COVID pandemic that has been included within this. I'm open to any questions. Some of the fees in there are discretionary, some are statutory fees, and the report on all of them, so you've got a clear picture of all the proposed fees. The secondary point I wanted to make is that all the fees will go forward, if they're agreed today, to the council report in early next year, apart from the Hackney Carriage and private hire fees, which will attract a secondary consultation, which will go out to the trade in the new year. That is required in legislation. So although they're reported in the council report, there is a caveat that it will form part of a separate consultation to all the rest of the fees. So I'm open to any questions that any members may have.
If there are no questions, we'll move the report. So I propose we accept the report.
Second.
Seconded, Councillor Vince Hunt. All those in favour? Thank you. It's unanimous. Moving on to item 6. A review of the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Licensing Policy 2023 to 2027. And again, I'll go over to Mandy again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Licensing Policy, we do review this policy every 4 years to take into consideration changes in legislation. There's been a few changes in legislation during that period, and more recently to do with the Equalities Act and putting requirements on supporting people with disabilities and putting specific requirements on Hackney Carriage and private hire drivers and operators. We just incorporated those pieces of legislation within the policy, so the trade are fully aware of what their requirements are. There's some statutory legislation to do with us notifying other local authorities of revocations and suspensions, and that's part of the safeguarding agenda to make sure that an applicant who has been, or a driver who has been revoked with Shropshire Council, doesn't go to another local authority and then re-licence there. So there's a duty now on all local authorities to keep this record of all of those and share that information across local authorities. We did it already as a voluntary thing because it was an opt-in prior to that piece of legislation coming in, so local Shropshire Council were already doing that and were sharing the information. It's just that it's become a statutory function now, so we're required to, so we've just made that clear within the report. One fundamental part of the policy is the wheelchair accessible vehicles, so that's all Hackney carriages that had to be wheelchair accessible from the 1st of April 2021. Taking feedback from the taxi forum that was held earlier during the consultation period, the Hackney carriage drivers made a very valid point about the availability of their cleaner vehicles and the lack of availability and the lead-in time to electric vehicles and the cost of those where we are right now. So in response to that, what we've done is put in a separate specific criteria for wheelchair accessible carriage vehicles or wheelchair accessible vehicles to allow them a longer time to retain their licences. And that's included in the policy as a direct response to requests from the trade. And that is the reality for the trade. They are finding it really difficult to get those specialised vehicles. And so we've put that in to allow them to keep them longer. It slightly contradicts the clean air and the green agenda because we're allowing the diesels a bit longer, but the reality is, and we spoke to the air quality teams, the manufacturers out there are just not up to speed with the standard motorist vehicles, so we've had to allow that in there. And the fact that Shropshire Council have made all the Hackney carriages across the county become wheelchair accessible, it's only fair to allow them that additional time then for the manufacturers to keep up. And from a financial perspective, for us to force them to have a shorter period of time with those licences would not be financially viable for them. And it's really important from the equalities point of view that we keep those wheelchair accessible vehicles on the road. So those are the main parts of the policy. I'm open to any questions if any of you have them.
Councillor Isherwood.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I welcome this this update to the policy. I think some very sensible feedback has been taken on board. In Oswestry, we actually held some meetings because of a perception of a lack of taxi and private hire provision, and Francis Darling and Kate Roberts attended probably 5 or 6 meetings with members of Oswestry Bid, members of the trade, and myself and Duncan Kerr as elected members, and it was a really valuable discussion coinciding with the consultation on this policy. It brought all parties a lot closer together in understanding the issues that are faced by drivers and operators, and one of the main things was discussing the outcome of the consultation, the submissions made by members of the trade, and this was one of the main issues, was the age of vehicles. So I'm really pleased to see that that's been taken on board, and an extension has been allowed on the age of vehicles, because although safety and the environment are obviously 2 of the top priorities of the policy, we also have to ensure that people who rely on taxis and private hire vehicles actually have a service that they do require as a lifeline. So I welcome the report and move that we accept the recommendations.
Quite a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Seconding, so we'll go for votes. All those in favour? Thank you. Right. So we go to item 7. Got a slight problem with the computer here, so we'll go on that. That's the revision of Hackney carriage tables and fares.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
So, the Hackney Carriage Table of Fares was reviewed in 2021 when we required all Hackney Carriage vehicles to be wheelchair accessible. So we had a request earlier this year based on the cost of living increase and the fuel prices for the trade to have their fare card re-looked at again. So we've done that process. We went out to consultation across with all Hackney Carriages proprietors across the whole of the county, and we received the responses to that. We received one specific response with a complete rewrite of the table of fares, which we fully considered, but we also have to consider everybody else's responses and their thoughts on the submissions that's come forward. So what we've tried to achieve is a balance with considering all the correspondence and the responses that came in. We have put an additional tariffs in there based on the responses that come back for different charging periods. We've increased the fares to allow the Hackney carriages to offset the cost of fuel prices and cost of living, but try to get a balance between that and the same crisis that the travelling public are facing. So we've looked at it from all the responses from across the county, not just specific areas, and taken into consideration the views. And this is the fare card that we are proposing. And it's I'm open to questions on that if anybody has got any.
As you quite rightly stated, it's been consulted on right across the county. Plenty of opportunity for feedback, so quite happy to move that. Can I have a seconder? I'll second it. Thank you, Peter Broom. Very much. Right. So we go to the votes. All those. Sorry.
I thought you forgot to ask everybody else. I'm in favour.
Sorry. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Right. We'll go to item 8. The proposed variation of the designation of licensed streets. And once again, I'll hand over to Andy.
Thank you, Chair. So, just a little bit of background on this. Earlier on in the year, I brought a report to the committee about consulting on the revision of the street trading policy. We went out to consultation on the street trading policy, and as part of some of the consultation responses, there were requests for changing the original adopted licensed streets. So the report that I've brought before you today is a variation of the adopted streets, which is a legal process that we need to follow before we can then look at the revision of the actual policy document itself. So the report I brought today is just to show you what the requests were and what we're proposing to do from the legal process in terms of adopting those streets to varying those streets to no longer be licensed streets, to allow for the town councils who have requested this to run those areas locally at a local level, which is something we always have promoted from a street trading point of view, and I've always asked town councils if they want to take street trading on, they can do that. It's just at this time that from learning from the last policy, I think the town council have realised that the licensed streets have created some restrictions for them for the events and things that they wanted to put on in those specific areas. So have decided themselves to have them as unlicensed streets so they can effectively run them themselves and have what events they want on those areas. But in order to do that variation, I need to do a formal legal process of serving notices and things. So I brought this report today to let you know that that's the next stage in the review of the street trading and licensed streets. And then if you agree for me to go ahead with that today, I will do that formal notice process and bring back to the December meeting the revision of the actual street trading policy, which is what we set out to do initially. So I'm open to questions on this if anybody has got any.
Right, I propose that we accept the report.
Happy to second.
Thank you,
Let's
councillor.
do it again.
All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Item 9, responsibility of premise licence holders under the Licensing Act of 2003. This item refers to a conversation and proposals that were made at a previous council meeting regarding risk management along the river and possibility of people drowning as a result of intoxicating liquor served up at local pubs. So I'll go over to you Monday again.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an information report that was requested to be put before the Strategic Licensing Committee. The motion would come about on the back of the wider work that's been doing to do with river safety in Shrewsbury. And a question was raised about what responsibilities that licensees have in respect of drunk people, people on the premises, people leaving the premises. So the report is just to outline the responsibilities of licensees and where their responsibilities end. And also, I've made the point in the report to say for example, there is a culture of preloading, so people go out to pubs, they have lots of drinks at home before they get there, and it is a real judgment call for licensees as to, are these people drunk or not? Should I serve them or not? And there is no legal definition as to what a drunk person is, which I've tried to explain that in the report. I've outlined the licensing objectives, which is under the Licensing Act 2003, the requirements under the Act for licensees, and tried to give you a basis from a licensee's perspective of what their responsibilities are, which hopefully I've covered all the points that were raised at full council, and you as a strategic committee have now got that understanding of what their responsibilities are. But I'm happy to take questions if anybody has got any.
Councillor Mosley.
Just one quick question, and then I want to speak as well. I see that there's a requirement under the Act that the licensee or a member of bar staff keeps a log of people they refuse to serve. How do they do that? If the person won't give them the name and address, do they photograph that? Obviously not. But how do they keep a log of people they refuse to serve? Do they describe them? Do they get a name?
Yes, they're required to keep a book, a logbook of people that they've refused to serve. If ultimately the person refused to give their name, they will write and describe that, what's happened and the date and time, which member of staff has done the refusal, why they did the refusal, and keep that logbook that way. There's no requirement for detail. They can't force a member of the public to give them their name, but they will record that date and time and what happened and on that particular when they refused it, and what they did in terms of the process of why they refused them, and what procedure that they followed. And that's how they keep the logbooks.
Because I know that it is difficult to define drunk, isn't it? It's a spectrum and it's a perception, so it is hard to define that. What do they use in practice? Do they use sort of impaired mobility, impaired speech? Do you know what they use to define drunk as a licensee?
They're very experienced people, licensees. There's no strict definition. It is really a judgment call on the evening as to what they have before them. People react in different ways to the volumes of alcohol that they consume. Some people can have 2 glasses of wine or 2 pints of strong lager and be drunk. You would see them possibly wobbling. Lots of people can have quite a lot more than that and function quite reasonable and relatively normal in the same situation. And it is on an individual customer basis that they have to make that judgment call. There's no written definition. There's nothing out there that says,
They can't walk along a straight line like that.
Absolutely, and that is a judgment that the police will use if they stop somebody at the roadside. It's not something that necessarily licensees would do in a busy pub on a Saturday evening.
And my other question was, you say that when they get to the door, really their responsibility ends. I know there's been a lot of work done on river safety in other aspects of the council. I don't go out to these sort of establishments, I'm afraid, anymore, but it's a lot of posters, information in the establishments about, look after your friend, get a taxi. Is that all posted up in common areas, in the loos?
There is. Some of the licences have conditions on them that require all that to be posters to be displayed and information to be displayed as a condition. Older licences that perhaps haven't been reviewed or varied at any point in time for a number of years may not have those conditions, but we certainly promote the Challenge 25 and encourage this to happen. The out of hours officers that go out, they do have conversations with the licensees about the best practice, what they should be doing, what they should be having, and they're received very, very well. There's other separate sort of groups across the county. I know Shrewsbury Town Council at the moment have got a specific project going on to do with this, taxi marshals, rangers that go around the town, and all the work they do supports the river safety, and it's about educating people, to members of the public to understand. The door staff as well are very engaged with all this process, and everybody's trying to work together with the policing teams as well to try and pull all this together. And we've all got sort of different responsibilities in different areas, but we are trying to pull it all together along with the town council.
Thank you.
Any further comment? Councillor Hunt.
Thanks, Chair. It's many years ago, I think, looking around the room, I was probably the only person who was a councillor back in the days when Oswestry had a very successful community alcohol partnership, which was part of a national thing. It was something that I started with my connections with young people in Oswestry, and then it went forward. I don't know if they still exist anymore, but we had monthly meetings with local shopkeepers who had licences. We had meetings, the police attended, the local heads of both the sixth form college and the secondary school. Everybody was pretty well much there, and we worked to try and reduce the amount of youth alcohol abuse or usage within the town. It was, as I say, extremely successful. I don't know if they still exist anymore. but as I say, it was part of a national framework. One of the people that used to attend was Frank from the local association, Licensees Association. And on the question of, it was always a bit touchy with folks who are licensees, and when they banned people for whatever reason. I suppose really my question stemming from that is we did try to encourage the sharing of individuals who've had issues with alcohol and particularly anger, more than anything else, for want of a better word. Where does that stand now? Do we encourage licensees to share the information about people that they've banned, and is there a more efficient way of doing that? And where does that stand with GDPR these days? And just to pick up on the point that Pam made, I was out with a friend once who had a stroke some years before, whose speech was naturally slurred, and I often used to go out for a pint with him many years ago in Basingstoke, and he would often be refused to be served because they believed in those days you didn't preload. You went to the pub at 6 o'clock and you drank as much as you could because it closed at 10:30. But I'm just wondering where that stands up against, on the Disability Act, for want of a better word.
So can I answer all of that? Bear with me. So pub watches still exist. The OzCap, I think, was what you're referring to.
Well, it was a cap, then it became OzCap.
Yeah. So that's run slightly differently. It's not the same thing as it used to be. It's more run through the pub watches, and the bid get involved with the sort of localisation of that and the information sharing between those businesses, and the bid get very involved in Oswestry. In terms of yes, there is the banning scheme. It still exists. GDPR, I'm not 100% sure because it's very much police run from the banning scheme. I don't think I can answer Equalities Act with you without GDPR without actually going and coming back to you with that one. Because I'd have to look at the detail of the scheme to find out what has been signed off and what hasn't for the pub banning scheme. In terms of the Equalities Act, yes, you're absolutely right. People with disabilities, depending on the disability that they have, yes, could effectively get drunk. And I am aware of instances where this has happened, and we've received complaints. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier about that judgment call, and those the people serving in those premises would not necessarily know, unless that was a regular person in there, that they had actually got a disability. And so it's very difficult for them to determine on a case-by-case basis, unless the people with disabilities are open about their own circumstances. And again, that's dependent on the individual. So you can imagine in a relatively busy pub, perhaps serving food and things like that, then it's really difficult to sort of make that judgment call as a person in the bar serving or waiting on or whatever that is. But you're absolutely right. I'm aware of complaints that we've had about those particular instances. When those complaints have been looked into and explained, and bar staff have been made aware, they're totally acceptable of that and understand that. But in the position they're in, when they're busy, when they're doing other stuff, they don't. It's not necessarily a straightforward consideration that they would have. It's more about what they're looking at, what they're viewing. Are they drunk? Aren't they drunk? Should we be serving or shouldn't we be serving? And it's a very difficult conversation to have with somebody in that situation, unless the person with those disabilities, is honest and comes forward with that. And again, we can't force them to do that, and it's their own personal choice. Does that explain?
Yeah, I think so. I just wanted to know what our reactions were, and if there's thoughts being given how to alleviate those things. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lumby.
I go back to my earlier police training in 1980, when police officers were experts on drunkenness in law, and it came down to smells of intoxicating liquor, speech was slurred, eyes were glazed, and they were unsteady on their feet, Your Honour. And so there's a mixture of that. It isn't just slur, but in a busy bar that can be a bit harder.
Thank you. I propose we note the report. Second. Sorry.
Sorry. I wasn't
Councillor
going to
Isherwood.
put my hand up there, Chair, sorry. But I just wanted to ask, how involved does the council get in the sort of training side of things? Because it's a lot of responsibility on licence holders, but a lot of bar staff are young people, relatively inexperienced, and it is a very difficult judgment to make. You touched on talking about best practice with licensees, but is there any training offered by the council in the same way as there might be for sort of taxi and private hire operators and drivers? You know, do we actually get actively involved in training?
Okay, so the straight answer to that is no, there's no specific council-run training scheme. Out-of-hours officers and the licensing officers go out and give advice and support and help. For somebody to hold a personal licence, they have to have formal training, which is run by external agencies. So that there is requirements under the Act that they have to do, but from a council-specific training course, the answer is no. But the help, advice and support is definitely out there, and the officers and the out-of-hours officers make themselves available for pub watches, individual licensed premises, any queries that comes through, any feedback, complaints that come through, so advice is given on those or formal actions taken if necessary. So we are very proactive from that respect with all new licensees, that all new applications for premises licences, all that sort of thing. That help and advice and that guidance is always given out, and we try and support those businesses as much as possible.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Final call. So I propose that we note the report. Seconded. Thank you, Peter Broomhall. And all those in favour? Thank you. Carried. Item 11. I can do this one on my own. To note the next meeting.
10.
Sorry?
Item 10.
Oh, I missed. Oh, wow.
You do that one on your own. Just go.
Right, exercise the delegated power. Report of the transactional licensing team manager is attached. I do need you again.
Thank you, Chair. Something I've just noticed, and I've got a confession to make. I actually haven't put a heading on this report. Sorry, I do apologise. It is a delegated officer's report. What I did was change it into the new format, and by doing that, I've missed out a heading, so I do apologise. But it's definitely the delegated officer's report at item 10. So this report is the standard report that comes every quarter to let you know what the licensing team have been up to, what licences they've processed, the applications they've received, the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire obligations, and all of that detail in there. It is the standard report, just on the new format, without heading, sorry. But the detail in there is absolutely correct. So I'm open to any questions that any of you may have.
Okay. Move we note. I would move that we note. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Isherwood. All those in favour? Thank you, that's carried. Item 11, date of next meeting, 7th of December, 10 AM. Okay, I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.
I'll just let you know when the live feed's ended, Chair.